Welcome everyone to Formula One Manager 22. And the goal of this series will be to introduce you to the game itself. We'll start off in this very first video by choosing our Formula One team and then going through all of the different areas that are involved in managing that team, from the staff, drivers, all of the different buildings and facilities that we'll need to manage and upgrade throughout our experience. And then in video number 2, we'll do our very first Formula One race so that you can get an idea of how the races flow, what options do you have to control the drivers, the car, and so forth. So let's get started with the choice of team. Along the bottom of the screen, you'll see that you have an option to control any of the current Formula One teams as of 2022. Now, there are some things about the game that will look very familiar to those of you who are familiar with similar titles such as Motorsport Managers, but there are some key differences that you're going to notice as we go throughout this gameplay series. The first being that we are entirely focused in this game on Formula One. It is a licensed game and everything is focused, at least for now, barring any DLCs that may come out in the future. We're entirely focused on the Formula One schedule for 2022. So that means the teams from the 2022 season, as well as the tracks from the 2022 season. So with that in mind, our choice of team is wide open. We can choose the top of the grid, teams like Mercedes, which you see on your screen now, Red Bull, Ferrari. We can go with any of those. We can go mid-pack with a team like maybe Alpine or Haas. But my choice is to go at the very bottom of the pack with Williams. Williams offers us an opportunity to start at the very bottom and work our way all the way to the top. And that is what is most intriguing to me. So as we click on Williams, you can see a lot of information available here, not only in the current tab showing, but in the other tabs as well. The team name of Williams, of course, so steeped in history in Formula One. Right now, the season objective is simply do not finish last in the Constructor Championship. Long-term objective, to be a points contender, meaning to finish in the top 10. Now, you don't get a whole lot of money to start off, but even with that low, what is considered low funds to start off with, you have a pretty decent amount of money, as we'll see in a few moments once we get a little bit deeper into the gameplay. So those are some of the starting conditions you're going to have. As we move throughout the tabs, you'll get a more in-depth look at just how we got to this season objective of 9th. Our car performance will be at the very bottom. We are the worst car on the grid. Drivers, not a lot better. And then same for the staff as well as the HQ. Now, obviously, throughout a gameplay series, you're going to have the opportunity to upgrade all of these in one way or another. But we are starting off at the very bottom. We have our employees. Latifi and Albon are our drivers, and then we have a reserve driver and then various staff from the technical chief, head of aero, and a couple of race engineers to handle our drivers during the course of a racing event. And then finally, a biography tab letting us know when the team started, what kind of luck they've had in the past in Formula One. In the case of Williams, they have had quite a storied history of success. So now that we have chosen our team, let's move on to the next step. Step 2 is to input our name as team principal. So I've put in Pit here, and then we have an option as to the first time guidance or the help menu. There is a lady that will walk you through a lot of the initial decisions and can be quite helpful, particularly if you're not familiar with this style of game. But as I mentioned before, if you're familiar with other titles such as Motorsport Manager, you probably already have an idea of a lot of the activities you're going to be engaging in, so you may choose to turn this off. However, I definitely encourage you to leave this on, particularly if you're not quite familiar with this style of game. For our purposes, I'm going to leave this as disabled, and we're going to click continue to move on to step number 3. But first, it wants to remind us that this is our last opportunity to edit this information. We're not going to have the ability to do it any longer. So once I hit confirm, the team principal name as well as the help option are set in stone. Now we move into the main portion of the game. These are the menus that we're going to see over and over again and contain all of the helpful information that we're going to need. So in today's video, we're going to go one by one through all of the options you see at the bottom of the screen and get an idea and a feel for exactly how they're going to be used throughout the gameplay. We start off here on the home screen. This is where we're going to get a brief overview of all of the information pertaining to our team. Starting in the top left, Williams Racing, our board confidence, very important here. We start off right in the middle at medium. That's going to be important because if it gets too low, we risk losing our job and being fired. And of course, it gives us our 2 objectives, both for this season as well as long-term, which is essentially 2 to 3 seasons in to your career. This is where you need to be as well. If you are not meeting these objectives, then board confidence goes down and you could lose your job. So definitely want to keep track on this area. Bottom left-hand corner is the list of all the teams and drivers and all of the points as you progress throughout a season. We've got our 2 drivers here in the middle at the top, and then at the bottom, the next race. How long until the next race? Which race is it? You can also find out a lot more information about the track itself and the race itself as we move throughout the different tabs at the bottom of the screen. And then finally, along the right-hand side of the screen are all of the upcoming events. You can see today we have some different items on the agenda, as well as a few days in the future, a week out, and so forth. So you have all of this information here. Now, of note, you have sponsorship obligations, but particularly for this first season, you have no say in your sponsor, any of the obligations, any of that. You are not involved in that. It's already chosen for you. Not sure about season 2 and beyond. Hopefully that's not the case there, as I would very much like to get into the sponsorship, but for season 1, it's already chosen for you. And we'll get into the money and all of that a little bit later on as we get into the finances, but the home screen is definitely going to have some of the vital information you're going to need moving forward. Beyond that, we'll next move into the inbox. For today, we have our welcome message. Now, this is the lady that would be normally walking you through the initial steps in beginning your team. Audrey would be there for you, but in our case, a simple welcome email will suffice. So naturally, you're going to receive a lot of emails through your inbox as the season moves along related to any parts and pieces you might be developing, race recaps, and so forth. Okay, now as we move on to the calendar, this is where we're going to get a little bit more in-depth version of what we saw on the home screen. Upcoming events here is presented in a very nice format, but if you want to get into more detail, the calendar is your best bet. You're going to have the option to see exactly what is on the agenda for any particular day. And right now, there's not a whole lot going on until we get into the season for our first event. But as we start to develop parts, upgrade facilities, and so forth, there are going to be a lot more things that will populate this calendar. Moving on now to the circuits. Obviously, these are going to be the circuits involved in the Formula One 2022 season. And each of these seasons, as you click through, will show you the type of circuit, the first Grand Prix, a lot of information such as that. And then once you get into the race screen, you'll get to see the length of the races and more additional information about tire compounds and so forth. But again, this is going to be important that you know the different types of tracks, because as you develop parts and pieces for your car, some of them will be better suited to certain types of tracks than others. For example, balance circuits versus power circuits versus downforce circuits. Different types of circuits will excel with different types of parts and pieces on the car. Next up is our race tab. In the race tab, you can get circuit info for the current track. Next in line, review your performance targets, both a qualifying target, a race target, and then a hot streak target for each race that you will see, along with some potential rewards and some other options that you may have along the way. Beyond that, we have our driver overview so that you can select which drivers will be in the car, and then any car builds, which will enable you, as we develop new parts for the car, to fit those and make sure that you're using the most up-to-date and the best parts for each of your cars. Next up, we move into the cars themselves, and this is where you will no doubt be spending quite a bit of time, as this is where car development is handled. So we start off by the ability to see both of our cars. Here you can see exactly which iteration of the different parts and pieces are on the car, as well as, if we move back to the main menu, you can do an analysis on the cars, car 1 or 2, and you can see how we stand up to any of the other cars on the grid. We can simply choose any of those. So if I select Ferrari, of course, they're going to be at the top or near the top of the grid in pretty much all of these categories. Now you'll notice over here to the right, there's a lot of very specific information from as far as the G's, speeds, percentages for airflow, downforce, those types of things. Now this might not mean a whole lot to you, so you might want to use the E key to show rank on the grid. This is a lot more helpful to give you an idea of what does all of this mean compared to the other cars on the grid. So right now, obviously with Williams, we're at the very bottom in essentially everything. So everything on the car needs to be greatly improved. However, Ferrari is looking pretty good in all aspects. All right, so that's car analysis. We now move on to car development. This is vital. So this is where you're going to take a look at your current projects. Of course, right now we don't have any. However, that's not entirely true. I'm not sure why the decision was made to do this in the game, but you do have a suspension that will be provided to you after race number 1. But as far as I know, it's not told to you at any point in the process until it just sort of appears after race number 1. You'll get a message that says, hey, we have this brand new manufacturing project for a suspension that is provided to you that you didn't know about. So keep that in mind as you begin developing parts and pieces. So again, a bit of a weird choice to me to put that in there and not let you know that that's already under production, but such is life. To start a new project, we would simply come in. Do you want to design or manufacture? Design is new parts, hopefully better than what we currently have on the car. And then manufacture is to take these new parts after they've been designed and manufacture however many of them we would like to hold within the team so that we can put them on the car as needed. Now, why would you need multiple of the same part beyond maybe 2 of them to put and have fitted on the car? Well, if we have damage during the race, you might need to replace a front wing. So it might be helpful to have multiple of that part beyond just simply one for each car. And then finally, you have the research, which will not be available, as you can see here, until next year's regulations have been approved. So as we back our way out, again, this is going to be a vital part of the experience because without, in this case, Williams, vast improvements are needed to the car. So without that, we're not going anywhere fast. And then finally, we have our warehouse for all of the parts and pieces that we have manufactured. All right, now let's move back out and head over to the driver tab. The driver tab is going to be very important for our future because not only does it show our current list of drivers, both our 2 primary drivers as well as a reserve, but it's going to give us the ability to scout new drivers. So, for example, if I show overall rating from highest to lowest, then you can see here the championship. Most of these drivers obviously are going to be already employed in Formula One, but if there's one of these drivers that you would really like to sign in the future, maybe you'd like to scout them so that you'll have an idea of all of their contract details and what it might take in order for you to lure them to your team in the future. However, as you continue to scroll, we're going to find some drivers in here that are either free agents or might be currently in the F2 series. So if we click on a driver, you can see that we've got 2 options for scouting. We've got our standard scouting, which would only take 10 days, and it's going to give us some of the basics about their performance ratings and growth potential. However, detailed scouting will provide a lot more than that and get into detail about their current salary, any buyout options, the length of the contract, and so forth. So depending on your particular needs, you can choose the option for scouting that is important to you and go from there. Now, right now here at the beginning with Williams, we only have 2 scouts available at any given time, so we would need to do some facility upgrades in order to do more than that. But it is certainly advisable to begin scouting early on, because the better scouting you can do and the more scouting you can do, the more options you're going to have as the seasons go on. All right, so now that we've taken care of our drivers, we head over to the staff, and it looks very similar. We have from our technical chief, head of aero, our 2 race engineers, and then our engineering team, as well as our scouting team and our pit crew. All right, so you've got a lot of information available here. Again, all of this is going to be a lot to take in at the very beginning, but it is certainly worth diving into. And then, of course, at the very bottom of the screen, you can scout staff members as well. Which staff members would you like to scout? Do you feel like you need a new technical chief? Then you're going to find a lot of options here. And you see we've got several free agents along the way. So plenty of options there, but just remember to keep track of your current contracts. For example, our technical chief, he has various strengths and weaknesses as well as an overall score, but he also has a contract. So if we take a look at his contract, you can see 3 years remaining on his contract at a certain salary. And if we want to replace him with a better option, then it's going to cost us about 2.9, nearly $3 million in order to do so. So keep that in mind before you just rush in and try to replace all of your drivers and staff. They all have contracts and they all have certain links and buyout options that could cost you quite a bit of money moving forward. Next up, we're going to move into the facilities, and you have 3 separate areas: car development, staff, and operations. All right, car development are going to be the most expensive, and of course, they are also going to have the biggest effect on the development of our car overall. We have the factory, which is going to be responsible for manufacturing, as you might have imagined. And the factory is responsible for how many parts we can manufacture at any given time, as well as speed therein. Moving on to the design center, how many parts can we design at any given time? Right now, that's at a level 2 for Williams, as well as the number of engineers that are available for these projects. The more engineers, the quicker your project gets done. Next up is the wind tunnel, which of course is going to have a major effect on the airflow and downforce of our car. The computational fluid dynamics, of course, has a lot to do as well with similar aspects to the wind tunnel, airflow, downforce, drag, that type of thing. Then we get into the suspension, which handles the brake cooling, and then finally our car part test center, which gets into engine cooling, the side pods, and brake cooling, as well as the front wing. So no matter which part of the car you're looking to improve, there's going to be a facility building that is assigned to that. One or maybe even multiple of these buildings. Now, as we click on each one, we will see that there are a few things that we're going to need to keep track of over the course of our career. The first is the current status. Now, as we're at the very beginning, all of our buildings are at an effectiveness of 100%, as they are in perfect condition. Over time, we're going to need to do repairs to make sure they stay there, because as they drop in effectiveness, obviously they're not going to be as good in helping us with our car. And of course, each has its own monthly upkeep. Obviously, all of these buildings in the car development are going to be fairly expensive. Now we get to the upgrade. This is what we're all interested in. We want to upgrade so that these buildings will be better and give us better upgrades for our car. So in order to do that, it's going to cost, in this case, $11 million, take 100 days. But what does that get us? Well, it increases our capacity. We can, instead of working on only 3 manufacturing projects, we will have access to 4. And then increase in speed as well. So it's certainly worth your time to upgrade all of these buildings. However, you're going to have some decisions to make about which ones you prioritize, because at the bottom of the screen, you notice that we have just shy of $20 million. So do you want to spend large amounts early on for some of these upgrades, or maybe some of the smaller upgrades that we'll see in some other buildings here momentarily? All right, so as we back out, let's next go over to the staff facilities. Starting off with the team hub, if we click here, once again, we'll have the ability to refurbish and bring our effectiveness back up to 100%. Or we can do an upgrade, quite a bit cheaper here, not only on the upgrade cost, but also the monthly upkeep. So once again, keep in mind that everything affects different areas of your team, your drivers, and your car. So what you choose to improve and upgrade at what points will determine a lot about your progression throughout the seasons. Some of these will take quite a long time, as we saw previously with 100 days. Others, maybe not so much, only 25 days here. So we've got team attractiveness, morale for our staff and drivers. We definitely want to keep that high. And then your weekly experience gain. How much experience do your drivers and staff gain from various activities such as the race weekends themselves? Keep that in mind, as these can be vital in improving your staff. So we have the team hub. Next up is the scouting department. I mentioned earlier that right now Williams, by virtue of having the lowest scouting department, only gives us the ability to scout 2 potential employees, drivers, staff, whatever, at a time. You can improve that to 3 with a simple upgrade that will take 35 days. Then we come to the race simulator. Once again, the race simulator, very important because it affects the weekly experience gain for our drivers. So if we go to upgrade here, you notice that we get double, from 20% to 40% on the experience gain. And of course, more experience means more improvements in performance over the long term. All right, and now how can we allocate that experience? Well, let's take a look. We go into Nicholas Latifi, which is our driver number 1. You can see that all of these attributes are out of 100. Right now, we can also see that his growth potential is average. So he is certainly not a young superstar in the making. He only has average growth potential. His aggression is not very high, which can be good and bad, as you see over here to the right-hand side. But we'll have options as we obtain development points to spend these in the various different categories, depending on what emphasis we want to make for Latifi. Maybe we want to improve his strengths, or maybe we want to focus on his weaknesses. It's completely up to you. All right, so as we come back to the facilities, let's finally head over to the operational facilities. This is where we get the boardroom, hospitality area, weather center, helipad, memorabilia room, and tour center. Again, each of these are going to address a certain area of the team. So for example, the boardroom will affect the race confidence gain from the board, as well as the team attractiveness. And you can see for an upgrade of 780,000 over 20 days, the improvements that you will get there. Now, obviously, some of the others that you might be interested in, of course, team attractiveness is always going to be good because that can affect the amount of money that you are able to make through bonuses, sponsorships, and so forth. The weather center is vital on race day because you're going to need to know as best you possibly can with the highest degree of accuracy when the weather changes are going to occur, and that's what the weather center can bring you. Right now, we're at 60% accuracy on the forecast, which is not a whole lot better than simply flipping a coin. But we can improve that to 70% and beyond as we improve. Now keep in mind, the status of all of these facilities are for Williams. Not every team will have the same status. Some of the better teams will have better facilities. So keep that in mind. Not everybody is the same. Next up, we move to the helipad, which is currently not built at all. So for $240,000, we can unlock a bit of team attractiveness as well as an improvement in our sponsor payouts. Those of you who have spent some time in Motorsport Manager will definitely recognize that area. And then finally, the last two, memorabilia room, which is going to help out with the morale of our staff and drivers, as well as the tour center, which is going to give us a bit of income each week. You can see it's not a huge amount, that's for sure, but hey, every little bit counts. All right, so that takes care of our facilities. Next, we move over to the board where we have our confidence and the various different areas. We have our budget. Of course, this is extremely vital. We need to know how much money we're working with each season as well as during the season. So here you can see a total budget, $50 million, initial payment at the beginning, and then monthly payments as well. Our overall team rating right now at 467 for Williams, and you can see exactly where that puts us in the list, as well as other basic information important to the board. Then finally, the profile, which is going to let us know some of the basics of how many Grand Prix have we been in, how many seasons, how many wins, and so forth. All right, finally at the very bottom, rules and regulation. This is going to be very important as you go from year to year. As changes are made in the regulations, that's going to determine which parts of the car are you going to need to focus on. Maybe certain regulation changes have made certain ones of your parts obsolete. So very important moving forward. And then finally, my favorite tab, the finances tab, because this is going to tell me exactly how much money I've got to spend in all of these areas that we've looked at up until now. So we start out at the top with our season balance. Of course, we're starting out here at the very beginning of the season in March. So it's going to show our current balance, just under 20 million, starting balance, projected final balance, as well as projected income and outgoing. So this is very important information if you're looking for a very quick glance at it. However, we can get much more in depth by going into the monthly balance. This is where the rubber meets the road, because this will show the amount of money we have coming in right now from board payments, prize money, facilities income will give us our total income for the month. But then we have, well, how much money are we spending? Drivers, staff, and facilities. So as we upgrade staff, upgrade drivers based on their contracts and so forth, facilities as we do the various upgrades. And remember, right now Williams has very minimal facilities. So over time, this amount is going to increase, which means that ultimately our profit each month and available balance to spend is going to get lower and lower. But of course, there are definitely ways to offset that, such as improving our performance and attracting better sponsors. So you'll definitely want to keep track of this number, as it will have a big influence over the different seasons. Okay, then we have our cost cap. There's only so much money we can spend at any given time, so you can track that in here. And then finally, our sponsorships. As I mentioned earlier in today's video, we didn't have any control over any of this for season number 1. I'm not sure about season 2 and going forward, but I certainly hope that we are involved in the signing and relationship with a sponsor. But again, for season 1 at the very beginning, we had no part in this. We were simply handed our sponsorship for season 1. So again, finances are vital, because without a great grasp and understanding on the financial part of running a team, then you won't know how much money you've got to spend in all of the other areas. Now, our final area is, of course, the standings. This is something that we saw in the bottom left-hand corner on the home screen, but the standings will keep track of the points for both the constructors as well as the drivers throughout the season. So as you can see, there is a lot of information available within. And that's going to do it for today's video. Now, when we come back next time, video number 2, we're actually going to get started by doing a bit of research on some new parts for the car. We're going to upgrade a few of our facilities so that you can see exactly how the flow works. Now, you have a lot of different options here, but again, in our next video, I'll show you some examples of exactly some of the things you can do in starting with your team, as well as race number 1 in our career. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and stick around for more Formula One Manager 22.